Hello, and welcome to Everybody Eats, a Washington Wizards podcast on the Blue Wire Network. My name is Varun Shankar. I'm the Wizards reporter for the Washington Post. I had on Andrew Sharp this week on the podcast. He is the host of the Greatest of All Talk podcast with fellow Washington Post writer Ben Golliver, and Sharp is also a Wizards fan, so it was a great opportunity to pick his brain. We spoke about a lot of things, including Bub Carrington's year so far and what the future could look like for him, what the wing rotation looks like, and a lot more. Also, stay tuned to the end of the podcast for an announcement. Let's get to the conversation with Andrew right now. Joining me now on the Everybody Eats podcast is Andrew Sharp, co-host of the Greatest of All Talk NBA podcast, Sharp Tech and Sharp China. Andrew, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for coming on.
It's great to be here. It's a wonderful name for a podcast, so it's an honor to join you here. Great Wizards podcast name, and a lot to talk through here, you know?
Absolutely. I had someone ask me, like, hey, were you around for the Everybody Eats? And I was like, I wasn't around as a reporter, but I was watching, following the team at the time. And I remembered those comments and the explosive reaction it garnered from the fan base very, very vividly.
I remember the Everybody Eats era. It lasted about 2.5 weeks, but it was a hell of a ride. Do you have a connection? Were you from the area? What was your connection to the Wizards?
Yeah, I grew up in Northern Virginia, so I grew up a Wizards fan. I was in the building, actually, for John Wall's Game 6 shot against the Celtics. So
was I. There you go.
Really?
What a
okay.
moment.
Yeah, he jumps on the table. It was unreal. And then, things with the franchise have been just a little bit less exciting since, I'll say.
That was, I would say, probably the peak of the last 15 years, and it was immediately downhill with Game 7. I was also in the building for Game 7, and alas, it really has been kind of downhill since then. So maybe the worm will turn beginning in April. Let's say that.
Yeah. So I guess let's start with this before we get into the show outline for today. I'm curious, you are one of, I would say, the more prominent Wizards fans in the NBA basketball sphere, niche internet podcasting world, we'll say. What is your general feel about this rebuild as we are in the middle of year 3?
Wow, that's kind of a loaded question. But I would say I'm really glad. I was more of a vocal Wizards fan on Twitter and writing about them for Grantland and then Sports Illustrated like 7 or 8 years ago. I'm glad I haven't been playing that role over the last 4 or 5 years because I don't know what you can say. And as far as the rebuild is concerned, what you're hoping for with a rebuild is assembling pieces that you can envision being part of a playoff team and eventually a contender. And I think what was frustrating, certainly in the last 2 years, it was hard to see many pieces that fit that description. This year, the first couple weeks of Keyshawn George were very exciting to me as a Wizards fan. And then Alex Sarr has taken like a step and a half forward to where I feel much better about Alex Sarr after the first few months of the season. Granted, he's been hurt for the last couple of weeks, but I feel much better about Sarr this year than I did watching Sarr last year. I think he's cut out a lot of the threes that I didn't really love. He's embraced being more of a big man defensively. He's a pretty effective rim protector by the numbers. He has a lot of opportunities with the Wizards' perimeter defense. But I think those two guys, recently Will Riley has been coming on. I feel good about having at least a couple pieces. But obviously they have not gotten the foundational piece that would make me feel really good and optimistic about the next 4 or 5 years. And that's sort of the nature of rebuilding in the modern environment here because of the flattened lottery odds. It is what it is. I do find myself getting frustrated that they didn't start this process a couple years earlier than they did. They could have gotten much more for Bradley Beal had they been a little bit more proactive about going this rebuilding direction. And the writing was on the wall for about 3 or 4 years before they finally made the choice to do it this way. So to the extent I am one of the angsty Wizards fans, That's what the angst is about, less about the last couple years and some of the choices that have been made in the draft, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, you look back at that decision not to trade Beal at the time, and this was the previous front office with Tommy Shepard, and
Mm-hmm.
it just, the more you look at it, the more disastrous it looks because of what ended up happening with Beal in the immediate aftermath, what you were not able to get for Beal, what that draft looked like, and where the Wizards could have been positioned. It looks more and more painful the more, just the further you get away from it.
Yeah, I mean, the contract they signed Bradley Beal to, they had to know that he was going to command a max. I mean, they didn't know that he was going to make All NBA and be eligible for that super max deal, but they knew that they were going to have to pay him every single dollar in order to keep him in DC. Wound up having to give him a no trade clause. I shouldn't say had to give him a no trade clause. Who knows how exactly that happened, but it was a really bad decision. And I think it was not difficult. It didn't take a rocket scientist to play out steps 2, 3, and 4 and how it was all going to go back in 2020, 2021. And that was an era where trading superstars brought back 3 or 4 firsts, and you could have had the foundation of the rebuild in place with a trade and a couple years of rebuilding back then. Even the Russell Westbrook trade, when he came into DC, he got hurt the first half of the season, and they were well positioned to tank then. And then they came back and made that doomed push to the play-in, and that was a really good draft. I mean, that was Evan Mobley, Cade Cunningham. There were a lot of potential stars available. So, such is life. Now here we are, and they are finally rebuilding. And, I do feel really good about a couple of the young players on the roster. So I'm more excited now as a Wizards fan than I have been for the last 3 or 4 years.
There you go. All right, let's start with the lead. The most important story about the Wizards over the last couple weeks is
Bub Carrington coming back to life a little bit here. You've probably seen more of Bub than I have this season, but he looked so lost over the first
yeah.
2 months of the season. I was frankly pretty surprised that he was still getting the minutes that he was getting from Brian Keefe. And now, he looks like he could be a member of a rotation at some point. Can he ever be a starting point guard? That's what I would like to find out over the next 3 or 4 months is this somebody that the Wizards should feel good about as a potential starter in the future? The answer is probably no, but it would be good to get a definitive answer by the end of this season because some of the wings that they have would really benefit from a steady hand on the wheel as a point guard. And I would have completely written Bub off as recently as a couple weeks ago. But like I said, there have been some signs of life. He was really solid against Cleveland. Didn't have a great shooting night against Indiana, but also he looked like he belonged out there and looks a lot more comfortable than he did for most of this season or than he has for most of this season. I don't know. What do you think? You're going to be writing the stories over the next couple of weeks. Do you have any nomination for most important story of the next couple of weeks?
I do, but with Bub, I will say it's been a roller coaster for him. I was not as high on him as some other people were, even after his rookie season. I thought that he did some nice things. He showed some good creation in the pick and roll, but a lot of it didn't amount to any kind of efficient shooting. He didn't get to the rim, a lot of mid-range shots, a lot of tough shots, and it just didn't feel replicable. And I think this year you've seen the Wizards. If last year, I think for the rookies, and this is true with Sarr, and I think a little bit less with George, I would say, but with Alex and Bub in particular, they let them play to what they had done previously. And so with Sarr, that meant letting him play at the three-point line, letting him kind of float out there. And I think with Bub, it meant letting him just play naturally in ball screens. That meant getting to a lot of mid-rangers. And then entering year 2, it felt like they said, okay, here's what you did in year 1. Here's what we liked. Here's what we didn't like. Here's what we want to take out of your game now that you've got a year under your belt. And I think with Bub, you've seen them try and say, hey, let's lean away from the mid-range shot a little bit. Like, we're the modern NBA. Let's not be taking analytically inefficient shots. And I think that you have seen Carrington try and go to the rim early on in the season, not have a lot of success, shy away from that a little bit, and now you're seeing him kind of lean into being a three-pointer or nothing kind of player, and I think that's fine for right now. He's going to take a lot of threes. I think like over half of his field goal attempts right now are coming from three, and he's shooting really well from deep.
Yeah.
The next step is defenses are going to start treating him like a real shooter now moving forward. And as that happens, what's his next answer when they start going over screens with him and really chasing him into the paint? Is he going to feel comfortable getting inside, either going downhill and trying to finish with himself, because he's been trying to get to that lob pass so often that defenses know it's coming because he's not putting any kind of scoring threat towards them. So he's throwing some contested lobs, and it's leading to some turnovers and some fouls, and it's just been a little bit all over the place. So I want to see what the next step looks like, as if the three-pointer is real, and I think it has to be real for him to be a viable NBA player moving forward. What is he able to do to play off of that?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, hearing that breakdown, it all rings true and doesn't make me feel great about his future. As I mean, he's gonna have a place on the roster, but will he have a place is as like a core piece that they can count on going forward? I think that's an open question. And some of what you said reminded me that dating back to his first games in summer league and then last year, even as he looked comfortable, the lack of explosion was pretty concerning to me. And that's where you do see him struggle, get to the rim, and most of the time abandon those missions before he's even at the rim. And if you're not putting pressure on the rim, you're going to have to be a pretty incredible outside shooter to make the bargain worthwhile. And so we'll see. We'll see whether that element of his game can grow, because I think he's fairly comfortable navigating screens and navigating defenses. But at a certain point, you feel his lack of athleticism out there. And that is going to be a problem.
You feel it in two ways. I think you see the lack of explosion when he tries to finish at the rim, and you also see, and he's 20 years old, he's a young player, he's not strong. And you can see him get bumped off his spot a lot. And that, I think, leads to a lot of his struggles finishing around the rim. Now, the strength is something that can improve with time, and the one thing that Carrington does have is size. He's 6'4", he's big for a guard, he's got a 6'8" wingspan. Those are all things that should help him be someone who can, A, play multiple positions, and then be someone who can kind of defend a little bit up and down the lineup and be a little bit of a problem. And I want to see if he could use his size as he gets a little bit stronger in the NBA. I want to see him use his size as a finisher more, and that's something that's just going to come with time. He's someone who had a late growth spurt. That's something I've heard a lot from the Wizards, is that he's learning how to adjust from playing as a small guard and finishing as a small guard to now finishing as a big guard, which he is, and what that can look like for him.
Yeah, well, and it's funny. I find myself rooting for him in part because every interview I've heard, I come away liking Bub and rooting for him to do well. And then also, there's a lot of pressure on him because of the Denny Avdia deal, which I hated at the time. And looking back, I still feel like the Wizards, they had a mandate to get an extra first. They really liked Bub, I guess, and they just could not trade Kyle Kuzma. And so they wound up giving away Denny, even though Denny had been fantastic through the second half of the season in D.C. And everything that he's doing in Portland right now was foreseeable if you were paying attention to Denny in that final season with the Wizards. And so I think there's a lot of people who are just frustrated that Bub Carrington isn't Denny Avdia. And it would be nice to see him find his footing and make that trade look a little bit less lopsided than it currently does. But that may just be where the chips fall at the end of the day. And particularly going forward, as someone, I consider myself a fan more than a journalist at this point. And as somebody who watches Wizards games, it would just be really nice to have a competent point guard anchoring things night in and night out. And you have really felt the absence of that sort of presence for 95% of the Wizards games this year. Because if it's Bub, he's looked kind of lost. And if it's CJ, he's just out there gunning. And so some of the young wings, I think, could benefit from somebody setting them up a little bit more than they've had this year.
Yeah, with the Denny trade, it right now looks like the worst move this front office has made since they took the job. And, every front office is going to have some misses. I think at the time, if you said 2 first-round picks, Malcolm Brogdon for Denny Avdia, I think it felt fair at the time. Looking back, you wonder, I don't know, were they too eager to move off Denny, I guess is the thing. And maybe not eager is not the right word, but you just look at it and you say, I don't know if they needed to make that trade as much as it felt like they felt like they needed to make that trade at the time.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I think that the way the front office sees it is they just wanted first round picks and they wanted to bring young guys in. And you look at the roster now, it's like full of young guys, most of whom are never really going to pop. And why I hated it at the time, and I like kind of lost my mind on Greatest of All Talk after that deal, is mainly because they're trying to emulate OKC. And like I said at the beginning, I mean, one of the hallmarks of good rebuilds are cultures and a handful of guys that you can count on. They're not necessarily going to be stars, but you don't give away good players in the course of the rebuild. And it felt like Denny, maybe they didn't know he was going to be a star. He was very clearly a good player at that point, whereas someone like Kuzma very clearly did not have a future in DC at that point. And that's why they spent a couple months trying to trade him, or at least considering trading him. But Denny, on that deal particularly, definitely would have kept him. And he could have fit with any number of roster constructions going forward. So, yeah, I do think when you look back, that is the clearest, most egregious error that the front office has made over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think they also probably thought that they'd be too good for maximizing their lottery odds with Denny. How real that is, how much that should influence your decision in the modern, lottery landscape. TBD, but especially with the protected pick, I think that was something they were really cognizant of. All right, my lead, most important story about the Wizards, Tre Johnson is back.
Okay.
2 games back for the Wizards' number 6 overall pick. We had not seen him in a little bit because of a hip injury. It has been an interesting start to the season for Tre. He is not, I don't think he's been able to catch too much of a rhythm, and I thought that the way he was used early on in the year is different than the way he's being used now. And I say used, and it's not only a function of the places that the coaching staff puts him in. The way that the Wizards play offense, they're not calling a lot of set plays. It's a lot of read and react principles that they try to work off of. And part of that is that's a way that a lot of modern NBA teams operate now. I think another part of that is if you're teaching players how to play basketball in a modern sense, you want them to learn how to make decisions on the fly again and again and again. And this model of doing so, Brian Keefe is saying, hey, you're going to have to figure this out. I'm not going to toss you the life preserver immediately. And I think you saw Tre Johnson trying to figure out what the principles were and how to fit into that. I think also the fact that he's now playing without pain is helping because the last couple games, I feel like his off-ball movement has been so much better than it was early in the year. And I think that's something that's really important just because of the way his shooting can impact the shots he can get, but also what he can create for others.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited to see an extended run of Tre Johnson. So you're at practice every day. What's the deal with the hip injury? Is it because like the messaging around what was going on with that concerned me a little bit when he first went out earlier this year?
Yeah, we've honestly heard different things about it. At the time of the injury, Brian Keefe said that it was an injury that Tre had dating back to Texas. I asked Tre about that, and he said that the hip injuries were actually on different sides. So a little bit of confusion there. I'm not sure what the deal is, honestly, but he says now that he feels good. He's past it. It's stronger, and I think it shows in the way he's moving around. There were a couple of plays that stood out to me against Indiana where there's an action where he's in the corner and he flies off a pin down, and because he's such a good shooter, TJ McConnell has to go over the screen, and Tre gets downhill, draws 2 defenders, and tosses a pass off to Tristan Vukcevic, who gets fouled. Another play, Vucevic sets like a diagonal screen for him. Tre runs around, immediately rises and drains a three. And it was funny because on the clip, I could hear the Indiana broadcast, and you could just hear their broadcasters going like, "Oh my God, he can shoot."
Yeah, he can. I mean,
It's
I'm
unreal.
very excited to have a shooter that good in DC. And it's funny because when you see someone who's that effective as a shooter, it's almost like everything else in his game is house money at this point because he's
Absolutely.
going to have a place in the rotation. And I have to fight the instinct to get greedy and watching Tre wondering, like, all right, so let's see you go inside the arc more often. Let's see you get into the paint and build that into your game and be a little bit more of a playmaker. I think that's part of the appeal of somebody who's that young and already that dangerous as a shooter is like there are lots of different ways you could envision his offense being built over the next several years. And so I just hope he stays healthy because the hip stuff kind of spooked me a little bit. But I would love to see a healthy stretch. He should be getting 25 minutes a game over the next 4 or 5 months and just sort of let him explore the space a little bit. And I would also hope that he's encouraged to go inside the arc, go off the dribble, because that's the benefit of having a season where you're not actually that worried about wins and losses. You want to see how much he can stretch and grow, how much Keyshawn George can stretch and grow, and have a better idea of what might be possible for them over the next couple of years.
What it looks like for him, what it should look like for him. And this is a player that he referenced today at practice. And when I asked him, who do you want to play? Like, who do you try and emulate? He said Devin Booker. And I think that's like a really good example. Someone who can play on the ball when you need him to, but someone who's also really comfortable playing off the ball and reading screens and coming off screens. And again, weaponizing his shooting is something I come back to again and again and again. Don't just stick Tre Johnson in the corner and use him as someone who's there to space the floor. Use him as someone
Yeah.
who bends the floor and bends the defense because of what his shooting does and how it has to be respected by the other team. Have him be running around. Have him draw two players to him, and what that opens up down low for other players, and what it opens up for him when defenses play super aggressive, like that play where he tosses a pass to Vucevic, where I want him to continually try and be aggressive with his shooting and then play off that to get inside.
100%. I mean, Booker is the dream.
Yeah.
Something like Ray Allen could also work for him and is also like a pretty dreamy outcome when you look at where he is at 19 years old, because prime Ray Allen was really, really good. But Booker in particular is a good example of what I'm talking about, where first couple years in Phoenix, those were lost seasons in Phoenix. But he had the opportunity to play a lot on the ball and was pretty good in the pick and roll. And you could see outlines of what he's turned into in those first few seasons in Phoenix. Granted, they were getting shelled every single night. And I think there's a little bit more angst and urgency in DC right now than there was in Phoenix at that point, in part because everybody's tired of losing in DC. And so I don't think Tre is going to have just a blank check to run the offense the way Booker did, but you can still give him some of those opportunities. What I worry about with Tre is that he is super slight right now. He's like a more extreme case of the Bub Carrington situation where he's very easy to push off the ball. And I understand why he would be reluctant to dive into the paint and try to score at the rim and create offense that way, because he just doesn't have the body right now. If I were a coach for the Wizards, I would still push him to go that direction anyways, just to get those reps. But it seems like he shies away from that sort of offense, at least early on in his career. And that'll definitely be part of the development for him that's critical, is adding weight and just growing into his body over the next 2 or 3 seasons before he's somebody that you can start not abuse defensively, because the defense with Tre has been kind of a mess. He's part of the story with just unbelievably hopeless perimeter defense that we've seen in DC. So all of those areas are room to improve. having said that, I have not been this excited about a Wizards rookie in several years now. So it's cool to have him back healthy. And that will be something I'll be watching over the next couple of weeks. I'm psyched.
There we go. All right, let's get to the Wizards ticker and start with stock up. I'll go first. Justin Champagnie. His minutes
Oh,
have
yeah.
consistently gone up each month. He was averaging 4 in October, about 13 in November. Now he's up to about 23.5. His 3-point percentage, which was really bad in the first couple of months on a really small sample. Now that he's getting some more consistent looks, he's at 37.5% from 3 this month with some more consistent playing time. Rebounding. So it's funny because I look at cleaning the glass and they go by percentiles based on position. Just based on the lineups he's played in, they classify Champagnie as a big, even though he's like 6'6". But even despite that being the case, he's in the 72nd percentile in defensive rebounding and the 79th percentile in offensive rebounding among big men. And for a Wizards team that gets shelled on the glass, that is so valuable. You saw that against Indiana where he got like 14 rebounds. And so he's someone where he has a maniacally analytically efficient shot chart. It's in the paint or 3-point line. And so it's something where he has a very defined role and he does well in it.
Yeah, I mean, Champagnie, I find myself watching Champagnie wondering whether Keefe, why don't you think he was playing earlier this season? Like, was there sort of a mandate from the front office to play more of the young guys? Because the way he competes on both ends of the floor is so clearly what the team has needed all season long. Like, they just there are some of the young guys are skilled, but they don't play with force from night to night. And I think that Champagnie and Jameer Watkins have helped correct that over the last 10 days or so. And I found myself wondering whether Keefe's hands were tied as far as playing some of these guys earlier in the season. What do you think?
Not sure. I think this is probably where you see some of the gap for the Wizards when it comes to development versus long-term goals. And with Champagnie, you know what he is as a player. Like, even though he's relatively young, I don't think that there's a lot more for him to do as a player. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's more for him attacking closeouts, but you know what you have. And I think there's probably some desire to explore the mystery box of a Cam Whitmore. And also, you just have so many wings to give minutes. And so I think that's why you saw him kind of get squeezed out. But we'll get to this later. I don't know if you can move him back to the bench. I have a fun stat for you. In December,
Oh boy.
the Wizards
Okay.
have played 12 three-player combos for at least 50 minutes. Each of the top 5 in net rating includes Justin Champagnie. He has been a defined positive for the Wizards so far, and obviously this is not a year where they want to win, but I think just the way he plays and the energy he provides, it's hard to not give him that opportunity.
Well, that's the thing. It's like, as a Wizards fan, I don't necessarily need the Wizards to win, but I would love it if the Wizards could not get humiliated night in and night out and keep the games watchable. I mean, I went to Wizards Bucks, and I would say, a fun win, some big shots from Chris Middleton down the stretch. B, the lack of energy in that stadium is the byproduct of like accumulated humiliation over the last 4 or 5 years. And it would be fun. I also think from a development standpoint, I understand prioritizing development, but you got to prioritize the development of 3 or 4 guys, not 8 or 9 guys. Because if you're prioritizing the development of 8 or 9 guys, you're going to be losing by 25 or 30 more often than not. And you want the 3 or 4 guys, Keyshawn George, Alex Sarr, maybe you include Bub, probably not at this point. But
Bilal.
yeah, Bilal, I don't know if you still include Bilal at this point either, to be frank. But
Too much upside not to, honestly.
yeah, that's fair enough. You want them to get reps in close games, though, is the point. And guys like Bagley, guys like Champagnie, guys like Jameer Watkins, they're not going to be mainstays 5 years from now. But if they can keep games close and allow some of your younger players to experience what it is to actually compete for wins, that is a net positive in the long run for their development. And so I hope that becomes a priority for the second half of the season. And like I said, the last 7 to 10 days have been better on that front. I'm encouraged and excited to see more Champagny, more Jameer Watkins. Let's do it, you know?
It's that fine line that the team tries to walk between A, trying to maximize their draft lottery odds, B, trying to develop young players, but C, not just wanting to get smoked night after night. And it's a really tricky thing, and I think that they probably, if you're trying to like see their priorities, A and B far outweigh C, but you can't totally ignore C just because it is important not to have them, get bludgeoned night after night.
Yeah, exactly. So who else do we have on the ticker?
All right, stock up. I've also got Will Riley, another person who's
Okay.
getting forward minutes. He's up to about 24 a game in December. Not too much to say about Riley other than I like that he gets to the rim. He's efficient at the rim. He shoots free throws. And that's something that the Wizards don't really have otherwise. I want to see more from him as far as playing within a team context. It seems like when he gets the ball, he's got the ball for a long time. And I want to see him try and fit into the team scheme a little bit more. I also love the effort that he plays with, though. This is someone who crashes the boards really hard, someone who has more skill than Justin Champagny, but plays almost with the mentality of Justin Champagny, and that's something that I think it's good to see out of a young Wizards player.
Absolutely. And I'm happy to see him getting minutes, the way he competes. And I think the combination of his effort and activity and some of the skill and the size long term. I mean, I love as a fan anytime a guy comes into the league and then you get the report, actually, he's still growing. He's still growing an inch or two there. Always very excited to hear that. And I think that, there's really no downside to giving him 20 to 25 minutes and letting him get acclimated. And I find myself getting pretty intrigued about how he fits in 3 or 4 years down the line when this team is competing for playoff spots, because he certainly has all of the like measurables of a wing who can guard multiple positions, stretch the floor. You're not going to be worried about him not hitting shots out there. And I'm just very excited about the possibilities with Will Riley.
Yeah, there's a lot to be excited about. Who's your first stock up?
Well, my first stock up was Bub Carrington because the
Okay.
stock was just a flat zero. And now,
Fair point. Fair point.
It is ticking upward, technically speaking. And, we'll see where we are after the next couple weeks, next couple months. I would also nominate Jameer Watkins as somebody who, like I said earlier, is playing with force that the Wizards have just desperately needed. And, discovering a couple guys like that who can help the culture, help the sort of competitive edges of the rotation, that's part of a rebuild as well. And so I hope that he continues to get minutes. We'll see how sustainable some of the recent production actually is. But and those are the sorts of players that you're hoping to discover in addition to the high lottery picks that you're hoping to build the future around. And I think at this point, I mean, spoiler alert, stock down, Cam Whitmore, that experiment has run its course. And it's time to prioritize other pieces for the future here, and particularly pieces like Jameer Watkins, who are going to do a little bit more of the dirty work and potentially be really valuable role players to a winning team at some point. At least that, I mean, we're scratching the surface on any of these guys, but I watched Jameer Watkins and could see him playing that role a year or two down the road.
Yeah, with Watkins and I think with Champagny, the Wizards obviously need high-end talent in a rebuild. That's like the number one thing that every team needs. What you also need, especially in a second apron environment, is if you're able to get that high-end talent, if you're in a position where you're able to compete in some way a couple years down the line, you need controllable, affordable role players. And that's exactly what Champagny
guys who
can
will
be.
punch above their weight
Exactly.
and compete every night. And that's the thing. I think what's frustrating to me is, as a Wizards fan and as somebody who covers the NBA nationally and has for 15 years, I can look up and down their roster right now and say there are two players in DC who are going to be potentially high-end talents and are worth prioritizing. Alex Sarr, and Sarr is kind of a mixed bag. I think the numbers are actually better than who he actually has been through the first 2 years of his career. And then Keyshawn George. And beyond that, I wouldn't worry about prioritizing the development of Bilal because I don't think he has it. Bub Carrington probably doesn't have it. And so you shouldn't feel guilty. The Wizards shouldn't feel guilty about playing guys who are actually going to compete and move the needle night to night in the interim here, because at the end of the day, I don't think you're losing that much not playing, not running stuff for like Bilal, for instance, or most of the other young guys that have been assembled over the last couple of years.
I honestly think that's true next year and beyond. I think for the rest of this year, just because in part you're really trying to maximize that pick, let them play, let them get experience. And, with someone like Bub, he's only in year 2. It's still early enough that you could say, okay, there's maybe some untapped potential there, especially because he's younger, even for his draft class. Same thing with Bilal, especially because he came to higher level basketball late, I would say, with kind of the rise that he had, moving up from like the junior French team to playing on the same team as Wemby and then getting drafted. I think there's still stuff to get. There's more untapped potential, especially with Bilal, I would say, just because he's like, I don't know, a 90th percentile NBA athlete, even, I would say. And
a really good defender. I mean, it's worth seeing the story out just to see whether he could be anything other than pretty clueless offensively. Because if you could play him, I mean, he's been an impact defender basically since day one, and as he grows into his body, he's only going to get better on that end. So I wouldn't give up on him, but I also, I guess people could probably hear it in my voice. I've sort of given up on him offensively, but maybe I'll be surprised over the next year or two. Who could say?
We'll see. I mean, he's barely been able to get into a rhythm this season, but we'll see what it looks like when he comes back from this oblique thing. All right, I will give my first. Do you have any more stock ups before we move on?
No, because we mentioned Will Riley as well, and
Perfect.
His stock way up over the last couple of weeks here. Excited to see what the second half of the season looks like for him. Is it stock down time?
It is stock down time, and I'm going to start with Keyshawn George. This is not a reflection of Keyshawn George's long-term future as a Wizard. It's more about what the last couple of weeks have looked like. His usage is down in December. His percentage of shots coming at the rim is really low in December. His shooting percentage at the rim is not good in December. It hasn't honestly been good since the first couple of weeks of the season. It just feels to me like he's been a little tentative on offense. He's had some really nice passes, especially against Indiana. Some really nice plays there.
Indianapolis.
Yeah, there we go. But I wonder if it's just the fact that he's either number 1 or number 2 on the scouting report. I wonder if that's starting to take its toll on him and he's starting to feel the demerits of that additional defensive pressure, and that's part of the learning experience for a young player, but he just has not had the same offensive aggression and impact that he did early on in the season.
Yep. He was at the top of my stock down list with a heavy heart and with a qualifier because, for the first 6 weeks of the season, Keyshawn George stock among the 25 people who are paying close attention to the Washington Wizards in 2025, Keyshawn George stock was at an all-time high. Very, very expensive stuff. So in some ways, there was nowhere to go but down, nowhere to go but sobriety as people sort of reckon with reality here. But early on, he showed flashes of being so skilled as an offensive player. He's another guy who's not very explosive as an athlete, but the way he can sort of slink through defenses and make good decisions as a passer, he's very effective on ball as a shooter and off ball as a shooter. I don't know whether the numbers bear that out. You probably know that better than I do, but I feel
his
good about...
His overall shooting definitely is.
Yeah, I mean, he's just a really solid, definitely a solid role player, could be a member of a playoff rotation at some point. and could he be more than that? That's what I found myself wondering through the first 6 weeks, 2 months of the season. And over the last month, what I've been frustrated by is I just feel like he has not been very aggressive. And I almost, if I were coaching him, again, I'm putting myself in the role of Brian Keefe, I'd be like, you're going to take 20 shots a night no matter what the defense does. That's your only goal for the rest of the season, and see what it turns into. Maybe that's a mess. Maybe he's forcing it. Maybe he's not athletic enough to get himself clean looks. But I want to put him in that spot just to see how he responds. And I've been a little discouraged because watching him, I feel like, again, when some guys have it, when some guys don't. That's true with intangibles as well. And I wonder whether he has the killer instinct to be as good as his physical makeup and his skill package would suggest he could be. I don't know whether he can get there mentally, but that's what I would be pushing him toward as if I were the Wizards right now. Developmentally, see whether he can be a star, put the ball in his hands a ton, have him run a ton of pick and rolls, and see where the chips fall. Well, I hope they go that direction the second half of the season, but the last couple weeks has been like a reality check for me where it's like, all right, he's a nice role player, probably not going to be a future all-star at any point. We'll see.
I think that's probably where I still come down. I don't think he's someone you want being the number one or number two initiator on your team. I think he's still probably best suited to be a second side guy in the future.
Yeah.
I think he's really committed to making the right play, and I think that's good, right? Especially on a team like the Wizards where you're trying to encourage good habits for players. That's something that you want to see.
Mm-hmm.
I think when we talk about the intangibles, the work ethic is there with Keyshawn maybe more than any other player I can talk about on the Wizards. He is like there all the time. Like people rave about his work ethic. It's nonstop. You could really see.
Greatest of all talk, we had a listener in Switzerland who is a coach and emailed us about Keyshawn George's work ethic when he was in like 8th grade and knowing that he would make the NBA. That was pre-growth spurt even.
Wow.
So he was like, this kid is super impressive. So I'm happy to hear that is translated to the DC environment. And it shows, he's improved.
Absolutely. Just the way his handle looks from year 1 to year 2, even if there's been some struggles recently, like it's still so much better than it looked like last year.
Mm-hmm.
Where he's someone who I think takes the losses really hard, and you can see it. He's talked about how because he has more of a responsibility with this year's team and more of a role, a primary role with this year's team compared to his rookie year, he feels more responsibility and more almost guilt, I would say, when the team loses. And I think that's something that can be good. You want a player to feel that, obviously. It's also something that I wonder is like, is it kind of beating him down a little bit? And that's something that I want to keep an eye on, and I want to see how it affects him moving throughout the season. Let's talk about Cam Whitmore, who I think is also a clear member of the stock down. He has not played in 3 games. There's been some back and forth messaging from Brian Keefe about this. He first said that it was a matter of Cam not meeting the team standards, and then said it's trying to get other guys meetings. He really, Keefe doesn't want to talk about it, to be honest. But let me tell you this. It's about his play in game. It is about, specifically, not about, the Wizards are fine if you make mistakes in game. That's just a part of being a young player. That's part of learning and developing. What is an issue is effort in games and focus in games. And those are things that, Cam Whitmore isn't the only player who has lapses on the court, but he has the most. He has them more often than the other players. And so when you talk about why is Whitmore the one who's being punished when players like Bub Carrington haven't had good seasons, when, Chris Middleton even has struggled at points this year, that's why you're seeing him have a different treatment than some of the other players.
So are we talking defensive lapses or?
Yeah, I think you're seeing, defensive lapses where, sometimes you just see inattentiveness off ball, or you see him show the ability to do something once, and then that's something where you're like, hey, you can do this, right? And then he doesn't do it consistently. He's not able to consistently make the right kick out pass, and he's forcing shots, and you're like, no, I've seen you make really great early passes when you draw 2. Why can't you do it consistently? And I think that's something where they're trying to get that out of him, and that's one of the reasons you're not seeing him play right now.
Yeah, well, and I also just feel like you have to be a better offensive player than he is in order to make some of his weaknesses
Hmm.
worth the trade-off. And I would also factor in offensive weaknesses to that conversation where I don't feel like he's making other players better on the
No.
floor. Like people Wizards fans and people I've seen on Twitter, like there's a little bit of a Cam Whitmore contingent on Twitter. There's like some Stan accounts and whatnot. And it is fair to point to the players that the Wizards have on the floor and say, well, who is scoring from this group? Put Cam Whitmore in. He can at least score. He's going to give you a little bit of pop, put pressure on the rim. But by the same token, I just feel like there's a lot of tunnel vision with him offensively, coupled with the defensive lapses. And I understand if you're trying to sort of cultivate a culture that makes the young guys better, at a certain point, that just doesn't really fit. And so I can't blame the coaching staff for it looks like cutting bait. I'm sure this saga will continue all year long. I saw the other night Brian Keefe was like, "This is the last time I'm talking about Cam Whitmore." Probably isn't going to be the last time. Who can say what the next couple months look like? But it just doesn't look like a fit. I think a worthwhile gamble over the summer to see whether, all right, maybe there's something there, and that's the benefit of tanking is you can kind of roll the dice on guys like this. But the first couple months, the returns have really not been encouraging, and I can't blame the coaching staff for just going a different direction. I found myself really enjoying Champagny and Jameer Watkins, certainly a lot more than I did some of the early Whitmore games.
it's it's exactly that, where what are you trying to reward when you're trying to build a culture? And I think that the things that you're seeing in games aren't things you want to reward with minutes right now. And I think this is not going to be the last time that we see Cam Whitmore play for the Wizards. He's going to play again, and we will see what he looks like when he plays again, but he will have to be a different player than he has been early on in his career, because these are problems that have followed him from Houston to here. And you're in year 3 right now. There's
Yeah.
Not much is going to change moving forward unless he makes a concerted effort to change it.
Yeah, I wonder whether he will get another opportunity after this year with the Wizards because there is talent there. He is strong, gets to the rim pretty easily, and isn't a horrible shooter. So like you see the outlines of somebody who at the very least can play 15 minutes a game and just fill it up when he's on the floor. But thus far, even for the Wizards, that hasn't been worth all of the headaches that come with it, trying to fit him into a team context. And so I'm curious what his future looks like if he's not able to turn it around over the next couple months here.
Yeah, extension eligible after the season. If he and the Wizards don't come to an agreement, he will play one more year under his rookie scale contract if they choose to pick up the option, and then will become a restricted free agent. So we'll see what the Cam Whitmore saga looks like moving forward. Like you said, I don't think that Brian Keefe's last time talking about it will be when he chooses to be quite honest. All right, let's get to ahead of the curve, which is a potentially too early, kind of aggressive take that you're not too super tied to. What's yours?
Um, well, it's funny. I had one more nomination for
Oh,
stock
my bad.
down.
Go back to that.
No, no, no. My nomination would be Corey Kispert and Chris Middleton and CJ McCollum, specifically if we're talking about trade value. The last year or so, there have been fantasies about flipping Kispert, fantasies over the last several months about flipping CJ McCollum, Chris Middleton. I just don't see it when I look around the league. This experiment where they trade for really expensive veterans, try to flip them and get picks back. It has not worked so far over the last couple of years. And Middleton and McCollum, I think, are the latest examples of that just being better in theory than it will be in reality. So ultimately, I hope that particular strategy, I hope this is the end. This is the final year they try to do that. And next year, let's bring in veterans that we actually want on the team. And as far as the ahead of the curve take, along those lines, The rumors about Domantas Sabonis, that's not a bad idea if I'm the
Hmm.
Washington Wizards. I would not play someone like Domantas Sabonis for the second half of the season, but at a certain point, it will help to have credible veterans that can actually drive winning. And someone like Sabonis could help raise the floor if they get a lottery pick, a top five pick, hopefully top three. Don't want to get ahead of myself. But if they bring in a player that they feel really good building around, then bringing in a veteran to help stabilize things and just raise the baseline of competence for everybody would be a really, really good thing for the Wizards next year. And so I hope they go that sort of direction. I think a lot of people were pretty horrified by the Sabonis rumors, and there's probably nothing to that particular rumor, but that sort of move would actually not be the craziest idea in the world, given where the Wizards are and given the reality that I just don't think it's tenable to keep doing this year after year after year without affecting the development of young guys like Keyshawn George, like Alex Sarr. That's actually a really interesting detail you shared about George's psychology and him taking some of the losses really hard, because that would concern me if I were the Wizards front office. And so trying to change that story next year would be my goal. And, there are decent veterans that you can get on the trade market over the next couple of months.
I don't know specifically with Sabonis. I don't know if that's something the Wizards are interested in. I do think that the idea of bringing in some more McCollum and Middleton both came in. I think they were like 33 when they came here. I think that if you look at guys who are a little bit younger than that, but are still established veterans in the NBA, those are things that the
Mm-hmm.
Wizards could be interested in and not
They're
try.
trading for negative assets, like toxic
Correct.
assets, as a strategy, which is fine, but they also have to be realistic. You're not going to be able to turn around and trade them again. And they're not really moving the needle that much in the meantime, as these young guys are kind of flailing and fighting for their lives night in and night out.
Yeah, I think that you'll see. So McCollum came because of it's basically a downstream effect of the Beal trade. Is the way I think about it. You're trying to get off Beal's salary by turning him to Chris Paul, turning him into Jordan Poole, and then turning Poole into McCollum. Same thing with
Mm-hmm.
Middleton, except with Kuzma. And now that these two are expiring, my ahead of the curve take is actually I think that CJ McCollum could net the Wizards a first round pick at this year's deadline. And the way I don't think it's going to be McCollum himself who does this, but I think it's going to be a mix of McCollum and the Wizards taking back some long term salary from a team that's not really interested in
Oh,
keeping them.
they're doing it again, taking back horrible salary.
I don't think it's going to be
Um,
horrible salary, though. I think it's going to be kind of like, okay, that's probably like a little overmatched for who this guy is right now, but I don't think it's going to be quite as negative as you saw with McCollum and Middleton. I think that the Wizards want to try and surround their young guys starting next year. I think this is the last year of like the super aggressive tank, to be honest. I think
uh-huh.
that next moving forward next year, see them try and put a few more guys around their young guys that can support them as the young guys move from being young emerging players to being, the guys for you moving forward.
Hmm. Well, I hope you're right as far as CJ actually bringing back a first round pick at the deadline. That scenario is not completely implausible. What I worry about in general is the valuing of all first round picks as equal.
Sure.
Like, at the end of the day, if you're bringing back something that has a chance to be a lottery pick, all right, I get it. Take on all the salary you need to take on in order to do that. But like, if you're taking back half protected picks and stuff that's probably going to be in the late teens or 20s, at the end of the day, we have so many young players already, and there's only so many guys that you can add over the next several years. And sure, they're trade assets, but I feel like if there's one thing that kind of frustrates me or makes me roll my eyes with the current front office, it's that they really love to play that game with a bunch of picks that don't really matter and won't ultimately matter. And I look, having said that, they acquired Will Riley. They acquired the pick that became Will Riley, and I'm really excited about Will Riley. So maybe I'm talking out
And
of
I'll say
both sides of
this:
my mouth
Keyshawn
here.
George, Daniel Gafford trade, right? And
Keyshawn
so
George, that's true. That's fair. The two of our cornerstones, two of our only cornerstones here in Washington. So maybe there's some method to the madness, but I am ready to get off that particular roller coaster and just like build a conventional basketball team at some point in the near future, and that's where bringing in a veteran that's gonna just be extremely competent would be pretty attractive to me after watching the last 5 years in DC.
I think you'll see the Wizards shift to a more conventional team building style over the next couple of years. I think we're probably near the end of the super aggressive tank, and I think that's partially because of the emergence of guys like Sarr and George, and theoretically Tre Johnson is continuing to take a step, and maybe whoever the pick this year turns into a top 3 pick, and you land someone in a particularly deep draft. I think that what the Wizards view first round picks, and I think picks in general, but particularly first, they just see it as volume is almost as important as anything else here. You can because everyone is going to miss in the draft. It's just a fact of life. You're trying to project what 18, 19, and 20-year-olds will look like 6 years later. How many dice rolls can you give yourself to maximize your odds at finding something? You never know who might be the next Keyshawn George, who might be the next AJ Mitchell, who might be the next Alperen Şengün, who is outside of the. I think all of these guys are outside of the lottery, if I'm not mistaken. And
yeah, I think Şengün went 15 or 16, and
right.
That's a reasonable strategy, all things considered. And they've executed it fairly well. Earlier in the podcast, I said there are two guys that I feel really good about developmentally. I forgot Will Riley. I forgot Tre Johnson. So there are four guys that I feel really good about the possibilities for the future and whose development they should be prioritizing. And two of those guys were picked in the 20s. So there's nothing wrong with continuing to roll the dice and just taking every shot you possibly can, particularly if you're not going to get lucky at the top of the lottery. That's really the only option they have as they churn through the rebuild here. But at a certain point, it comes at the expense of the young guys that you're assembling to play that game year after year after year.
Absolutely, and this is where I think you might see the Wizards. Some of these young guys might not be here in a couple years, and we'll see what that looks like as these guys start to need contract extensions and the Wizards' willingness.
Well, that's the other thing. Yeah. At a certain point, a lot of them are going to be commanding pretty big numbers that you're not going to feel great about committing to on the second deal. So trying to consolidate would be also really healthy a year or two from now.
And if you can't get your star through the draft, maybe that star comes by packaging some picks and players together, and we'll see what that looks like. All right, what do you want to know about the Wizards over the next couple of weeks?
Can Bub be a starting point guard, and can Tre Johnson score inside the arc consistently? Those are the two questions that I'm excited for. Oh, well, I would say anxious on the Bub side and excited on the Tre side. And I hope we just get a healthy 4 or 5 months of Tre, because you hear hip injury and I immediately worry, all right, is that going to be a nagging thing for the first 4 or 5 years of his career? So first and foremost, I want health for Tre Johnson. And then also, like I said earlier, let's explore the space a little bit, see what the possibilities are for how dynamic his offense can be. And at the very worst, we're going to get the best shooter the Wizards have had since the first couple years of Bradley Beal's career. And that's a great foundation in terms of what he could be for this franchise going forward. And maybe a little bit of Keyshawn George, Keyshawn George, be more of an a-hole would be my recommendation to him for the second half of the season. What are you looking forward to? You're going to be in the trenches the next month here.
Absolutely. What I want to know, what's going to happen with the ring rotation? At some point, Middleton, Koulibaly, Kispert are all going to come back. What does that mean for Justin Champagne's
Don't
minutes? What does
play
that mean
any
for
of
John
them.
Watkins? You see, I got bad news for you there. What's going to happen with Cam Whitmore? I don't think Justin Champagne can exit the rotation at this point. I think he's just playing too well. And,
Yeah.
Justin's just like, the way he plays is contagious, and I think that's something that the Wizards really do want to bottle, but there's a lot of factors that go into it, so let's see what it looks like. Andrew Sharp, where can people find your work?
People can find my work at Stratechery, which is a tech and business newsletter. I host a couple different podcasts for Stratechery. One is Sharp Tech, where we cover tech and business for 90 minutes, an episode every week. And then I also host Sharp China, which is a geopolitics podcast, obviously focused on China. That too is weekly. And then I host Greatest of All Talk. If you subscribe to Stratechery, you can get access to daily writing from Ben Thompson, who is the best tech analyst alive. And then also you get access to every single Greatest of All Talk episode we do, which I host with Ben Golliver, national NBA writer for the Washington Post. And we've been doing that for about 10 years. And it is my favorite podcast that I record every week, twice a week. We got the Cup this week, so we'll be recapping whatever happens with Knicks Spurs, which tips in about 2 hours here. And we do that all year long. And I look forward to keeping it rolling for years to come here.
There we go. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for listening. A quick update. This is actually going to be the last episode of the podcast. I am leaving the Wizards beat at the Washington Post for another opportunity that I'm going to announce soon. I just want to say that a real thank you to anyone who has read, listened, or watched to anything I've done. It means a lot that you guys chose to engage with the stuff that I put out there, and it was a really wonderful opportunity to work for the Post and to cover the Wizards. So thank you to everyone who helped make that happen. You can follow me at Varun Shankar, and I'll see you guys around.